Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Research Talks Qualitative Scholar Conversations. With us today will be Alison Hamilton, and Alison will be talking to us about our summer intensive course. We'll give that title and date in just a little bit, but we're also joined by my colleague, Jeff Petruzzelli and Paul Mihas. I'm Ray Maietta, president of Research Talk. And Jeff, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. I'm Jeff Petruzzelli, a qualitative research specialist with ResearchTalk, and I've been with the company since 2001.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Mihas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odum Institute at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm also a consultant with ResearchTalk.
Thank you so much. And before Alison introduces herself, I'll give the full title of her course at QRSI. It's one of three different courses she's presenting. And this one is titled Applying Qualitative Methods in Implementation Research, Fundamentals, Developments, and Innovations. And Alison's course this year is July 24th and 25th. Alison, if you can give us a little introduction to yourself and what brings you to teach this class, just kind of a short version of that question, then we'll roll in conversation. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Alison Hamilton. I am an anthropologist by training, a professor in psychiatry at UCLA, and a research career scientist in the VA. And I've been a ResearchTalk consultant for, probably close to 25 years. It's been a long time, one long and wonderful time. And I have been doing implementation research for a couple of decades. It is, of course, we'll talk all about it in the course, but it is a great fit for social scientists because it's an area of work that really is interested in context. It's interested in relationships, behaviors, how people do things. And so what we learn and know how to do with qualitative methods is a really good fit for implementation research.
Beautiful. And when we think about the folks who actually are going to be with you for those 2 days and sitting in the course, what's like when you think about kind of if somebody asked, hey, Alison, what am I getting if I take this course? What would you offer them?
So implementation science is a particular field, which means that it has, things that go along with it in terms of terminology and ways of approaching research and the types of research questions that we ask. So what's really important, I think, in the context of the course is to situate how we use qualitative methods within that space of implementation science, which is focused on increasing the uptake of evidence-based practices into routine services, care. It does happen a lot in healthcare, but it also happens in other fields as well, education, policy, et cetera. And so we really look at best practices and figure out how do we ensure that whatever institutions and organizations are doing, they're doing so with best practices, evidence-based practices, et cetera. And so the course is really oriented toward helping people to understand that sort of general field because it's important to get those components kind of under your belt to know what these different terms and concepts are, and then how qualitative methods fit and are typically used in this area, and then also a lot of the innovations that have been happening in this area as well. So the course, because it's been a course that we've offered for a long time and has kind of paralleled the evolution of this field, accordingly, what we can address in the course is really exciting because it is not just kind of how we usually do things, but how people are trying things out now with qualitative methods, using ethnographic methods, for example. So really looking at the range of methods that we can use and how do we think about connecting them to the research questions and the theories, models, and frameworks that we might be looking to use.
So when we think about the folks who have learned with you in the past during your courses, we see people who are currently there and they're doing exactly what you're teaching. They're, using the qualitative methods and, implementation research and really thinking about kind of taking up to practices and doing so in a way that's driven by what you learn in your research. There are other people who are undergoing a project and they're like, I could use this guidance to get that going. But some folks who consider class and do take your class haven't yet taken the step of designing a project, getting a project ready, or doing one. And they're still asking the question, why would I intro and implement qualitative more thoroughly into my work? What would you say to those folks? How would you kind of like talk to them about the value add of using qualitative?
Oh gosh, we have to make a short video, right? There are questions that we ask in implementation research that really would be difficult to ask with other methods, because when we're in a good position with qualitative methods to understand things that are dynamic, things that are complex, things that are nonlinear. And we don't know, like as soon as we think we understand how something is going to go in terms of implementing a particular practice, then you try it somewhere else and it doesn't work at all the way you thought it would. So when we design questions and ways of asking those questions using research, we're opening up a lot of inquiry. And then whenever we have that space for open inquiry and really looking to understand things that we don't understand, qualitative methods, what more could we ask for than what qualitative methods give us to be able to explore those things that we don't understand and things that we maybe we're taking for granted or expecting in a certain way. And then, this type of work is full of surprises. So when we're, kind of entering into something, knowing that there will be surprises and unexpected twists and turns, it's really helpful to be able to draw on qualitative methods to understand those different pathways and trajectories that this work takes.
Open inquiry is such a well-chosen term, Allison. People think of open inquiry at early phases in work and understanding and research on a topic, but you really express that it's not just at the beginning, it's kind of as things move. And your words are just so powerful, thinking about dynamic, complex, nonlinear. That's so much of what's happening in our world. So thank you so much for that. It's hard to do what you just did to answer that question in such a concise, empowering way. I want to check in with Jeff and Paul. I know the two of you come to these conversations with quiet comments you bring to them, and also some questions generate as you go. So I wanted to check in first with you, Paul, see if there's anything in flow of the content so far that you wanted to pick up on. And then, or anything you want to kind of put forward to Allison.
Sure. So Alison, you mentioned earlier about conceptual frameworks that we're looking to use. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of balancing that with a more exploratory inductive work within the space of implementation research. I know that sometimes those tensions can be productive, but I'm wondering how you think of them in terms of implementation research.
Such a great question. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I mean, this field is definitely characterized by the explicit and intentional use of theories, models, and frameworks because we are trying to understand how things change and having theories that help us to understand that, as well as frameworks that give us sort of organized ways to pursue what we're trying to understand in phases and using different determinants and concepts and things like that. And so you're absolutely right that there can be a tension given that we go into this type of work with typically with a framework in hand and say, this is what we're using to guide the study, which of course is not as open as we might be in other types of qualitative work. And I think that there's been a lot of, this is one of those areas that we can explore in this year's version of the course that has really been evolving since I was first teaching the course, where we hadn't engaged as a field that much in innovation around exploring that tension, exploring other ways of understanding what's happening in the context where implementation is occurring without that sort of uh, um, deliberate, I suppose, attachment to a framework, because we want to not only see what might make sense within a particular framework, but what might fall outside of that framework. And of course, some of our qualitative methods are really well suited to help us do that type of thinking as well. But I'd say it's more characteristic of work that's been done maybe in the last 5 years or so in the field. So that's why I say this isn't something that we even were entertaining all that much in the early stages of this work, but now can really dig into the question that you asked, which is how can we um, even remain and retain that sense of curiosity and inquiry, and kind of look outside the bounds of any given framework to help us understand what's happening. And I think that's, from my perspective, a big part of where ethnography can fit in really well. And so that's work that my colleagues and I have been doing with an idea of pragmatic ethnography. So how can we use the strengths of ethnography without spending years and years in the field? And I think that's a really great direction for us to go in to get at what you're describing, Paul.
Thanks.
It sounds like, Alison, as you're talking to, that it's critical that people are aware that you can't do this work well without really studying what's happening, what are trends, what is movement in the field, what's currently being said on your topic. It's like an ongoing flowing conversation and evolving sense of knowledge. And you have to kind of have your finger on that pulse and be aware of that, probably not just as you design, but even throughout you know, as the projects progress, right? It's just this, meta awareness.
Yeah, and there's lots of help for that. There's lots of tools, and anyone who's taken any of my classes know that I like to be very practical and think about tools and what kinds of things are going to be helpful. And there are ways that we can track shifts, that we can monitor shifts, when we can do so in semi-structured ways, even open-ended ways. So we don't have to do so in a very, kind of structured, wholly deductive way. That is probably going to be a piece of what we do in this type of work, because, we're also often using qualitative methods in the larger context of a mixed methods implementation evaluation, let's say. So there may be some elements of the qualitative work that are really designed to dovetail in some way with the quantitative work, and that can impact, the way we approach the work as well. But I think there is that opening up of possibilities and innovations, methodological innovations, that's really, really exciting to see and be part of. So I always love teaching this class because I get to bring something, new to it. I get to push myself in terms of, what to share with folks each time this comes up. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Yeah, Jeff, well, yeah, tell us what you're curious about.
Yeah, Alison, as we think about innovations and movement in the field of implementation research, I noticed in your description you talk about community-based participatory research, and I know that's certainly a big part of what you do in your own work. So I was just hoping you could tell us a little bit more about how CBPR approaches fit in with implementation science.
That's also a great question, Jeff. Thank you. Um, that's been a really interesting and exciting aspect of the evolution of this field as well, recognizing that when we're trying to change things in a community-based context, we need to do so in close conversation with the community where we want that to happen. Ideally, having strong relationships, understanding what the community's needs, preferences, sticking points, priorities, what all of those things are, so that when the implementation research is happening, it's happening in a context of understanding and of prioritization and strategies that will make sense and be really relevant to the communities where it's happening. So, CBPR predates implementation research by many, many years. And so it's not as if it's the CBPR part itself is not new. I think what has been newer in this has been the kind of more central location that CBPR techniques and concepts and approaches have taken in implementation research, drawing on that really rich legacy of CBPR and recognizing that much of what happens in CBPR is it's not only nice for implementation research, it's actually pretty essential for implementation research to take much more of a community-centered approach. Like if you're trying to change some type of health issue in a community, you need to understand that community, which is again where qualitative methods are such a great fit. Understand how that particular health condition, how does it matter in that setting? Who does it matter to? In what ways does it matter? What are the services that are available? What are people's experiences of that condition, et cetera? These are all things that we can get at with CBPR and that are really important to infuse into our implementation research.
So when we think more about kind of the different groups, right? Again, moving from the entrenched in commitment to implementation and qualitative, there's another group who may never do implementation research, but having talked with you about the course and how you're always so conscious about how the course evolves and shapes and things of that sort, there's so much that a career qualitative researcher or someone new to qualitative inquiry, motivated by its power, could learn from taking this class. So if there's a qualitative researcher who, like I said, isn't really ready and may never see themselves doing implementation, what do you think? Why should any qualitative researcher sit through 2 days with you and your colleagues learning together?
I think that there is value in learning about how to use qualitative methods in pretty pragmatic and applied ways. And that's certainly what this course emphasizes. We're using qualitative methods in implementation research to understand things that are happening, the introducing a new practice, maybe trying to undo a practice that's actually not effective. These are things that we look at. And so there are pretty specific applied practical questions that we ask and that we need to answer with our qualitative data. And for people who may not be doing implementation research, but are doing applied, using qualitative methods in an applied, pragmatic way, I think that there would be a lot of relevance from this course. It may not be so much about, the components of implementation research, like I was mentioning earlier, those may not be as relevant, but the whole idea that we would kind of focus on creating that fit between the questions that we're asking and the ways, the types and ways that we're using qualitative methods, I think could expand beyond implementation research itself in that more applied, pragmatic direction.
So as you were talking, I was brought to several moments when we were talking about your work and things of this sort, and again, the evolution of the course. And I know that so much of what you bring to what you share with people to try to improve their expertise comes from lessons you've learned from the field. And you're always very aware and conscious and responsive to oh, here's a lesson for next time. Here's ways we can kind of keep the foundation of what we do, shift this. And you're also not opposed to saying, okay, let's kind of blow it up a little bit. So I was just wondering if, as we move toward a close here, you had kind of a story of something that happened during your field work where you later, or maybe even at the time, thought, uh, this is something I can bring to others, and it's a good learning point to not just help us decide what to do next in this project, but something that would be a great lesson for folks who are either doing the work now or will be soon.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind for me is in one of our large implementation initiatives, we have the lovely benefit and advantage of having a large qualitative team, very skilled folks. And um, so what's typical in this type of research is that you'd do interviews, let's say, semi-structured interviews before anything changes. So what we call pre-implementation interviews to understand, what are we kind of going into? What are the concerns that people have um, about, what we're going to introduce, what we're going to try to do. Um, and so it's a very critical data collection juncture because that really guides what we do at sites, for example. If we learn, oh, you're going to need to understand this about our setting before you come in. And so it's very important knowledge for us to have. And what we started learning and experiencing was that our interviewers were getting a lot of questions about the projects, which is, what we're typically doing with the interviewers is they are asking the questions, not being asked the questions, but they were being asked because they were being seen, rightfully so, as ambassadors of the project. And so we it was happening so much, and we didn't want our interviewers to be at any disadvantage in terms of not being able to answer some questions that people were pretty consistently asking in interviews, that we developed new procedures to create more of a feedback loop between the evaluation team and the implementation team, and really thinking about what do our interviewers need to know about the projects so that they can be really informed when they do their work, and what do we need to know from what they're hearing so that we can be informed in what we're doing, and just kind of shifting those lines, even rethinking those lines between implementation or intervention and evaluation, and also thinking much more carefully about the role and the posture and the um, messages that the interviewers have and impart, during the data collection efforts was a pretty big revelation, and one that we, really adjusted um, a lot for, and designed some new approaches for, to be able to do things differently and hopefully better, moving forward from there.
It's great. Allison and Paul and Jeff and I have all been part of teams that co-teach the design and data collection camp, and Allison and Jeff and I will be again teaming up to do that coming up here in March. And one of the things that what you just raised brings up is just it's really critical that teams don't just see data gathering, data collection as this period that begins and stops, and there's just kind of a numb mind going on. By no means, but communication, thinking aloud, all of the reactions after a particular data collection episode, there really needs to be ongoing communication, doesn't there, through that all of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. We realized we needed much more frequent feedback loops, and um I think it made our work better because we were all expanding what we knew and what we were learning, and it wasn't um kind of bound by the limitations of, okay, well, I can know X and you can know Y. It's not going to make the work stronger. So if we both know X and Y, we can then, make more informed decisions and do better jobs at what each of us is assigned to do. So yeah, it's really made a huge difference. And I think it has some sort of intangible benefits as well, just in terms of people feeling like, they're united in what we're trying to do in the research. everyone playing a different role, but very much, the team making
Right.
it happen.
That word united is, again, perfectly chosen. Yeah. Oh, so I just want to check in, Paul and Jeff, before we pose the opportunity for Alison to close us out today. Anything else on either of your minds?
Well, I'm just thinking that this is just a great experience in teamwork and team building. Implementation research is, you learn a lot about the team itself, and I think that's really added value to all of this.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, Paul, to the question you asked earlier, Ray, as well, is about how do you engage in team-based qualitative data collection and analysis. I think that's a big part of what we talk about in the course, and that might be another point that, even for someone who's not interested in implementation research might benefit from hearing and thinking and talking about that.
Yeah, we talk about like building rapport with participants, but we also need to have rapport with our right.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Great. Anything you want to say in closing, Alison? Thank you so much for your time. It's great. It's really looking forward to the course, the 24th and 25th of July.
I know. I mean, just talking about it now just gets me very excited about it. I love this topic and spend a lot of time thinking about it and doing it. So I just hope that folks will be interested in joining and bringing their, experiences, questions, thoughts, ideas to the course, which, as I mentioned earlier, just continues to evolve, and I try to keep it very up to date. So I'm excited for the directions that it's taking for this summer. So hope to see folks there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paul.